Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. Here's your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. We are talking about a very important topic today because it seems that there's only one person that's actually talking about health in the United States on the political level, and a new book just dropped. Sharyl Attkisson is here to discuss Follow the Science, How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. Sharyl, welcome back to the P.A.S. Report. How are you?
I'm good. Great to be here, Nick.
Well, I'm always glad that you could join me, and your new book has been released, and I think it's such an important book in this moment in time, given everything that we lived through during the coronavirus epidemic, but it goes far beyond just COVID and the pandemic. This is something that's been decades in the making, and you uncover it in your book. How did you find the ties between the government, big pharma, corporate media, all to mislead the public, speak from the same script? What are the examples you could give us where that's occurred?
Well, this came through experience, starting as an investigative reporter at CBS News when I was assigned to cover medical scandals and controversies, which are very much like other corruption stories. But I found sort of this unique pushback and organized efforts through nonprofits and law firms and third parties that tried to controversialize and stop the reporting and lay out these false narratives. So it grew and grew from there. But I think during COVID, a lot of eyes were open. People that hadn't paid attention or seen this before, they really did start to see a bit of what was going on. Examples, you mentioned big pharma, media, and I think there were three aspects, I guess, our political figures. I would corner that out with a fourth that I think is very important in this book, the medical establishment. That's a fourth angle that works with the other three in a way that's unseen, that I think most people don't work about or don't think about, that largely explains why, when we've never spent more money on healthcare and medicine and doctors and insurance, why we're growing sicker as a society with chronic illnesses. And yeah, I can give you all kinds of examples. Would you like to talk about how I think the doctors begin to have this influence in med school that affects them and impacts how they treat us later?
Yeah, I think that's really important because you just hit the nail on the head. You see these chronic illnesses, and the American healthcare system, it's not meant to heal and get people healthier. It's essentially meant to just maintain unhealthiness. So yeah, absolutely. Explain what happens in medical school to start this process.
Well, people may wonder why doctors as a profession and our federal health agencies, they act like they don't notice that this is going on, what's been happening the past 20 years with these chronic disorders. They just throw pills out. They don't declare emergencies over these ubiquitous diseases that are afflicting so many people. They don't address the root causes. So one example is I found in med school, many doctors refer to something called the Merck Manual, which is called one of the most popular medical references in the world. The Merck Manual for doctors to be is written by Merck, the pharmaceutical company. And the company swears that its editorial division is separate from its pill-making division. But I did some checks to see what they're teaching doctors about their own controversies. After all, they've had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, in fines to settle charges that they've committed fraud, bribed doctors, kickbacks, dangerous medicine. Do they speak to that in the books that they're teaching doctors from? What do they say about their own medicines? And I found not only serious omissions, that doctors are not being told very important things, but also false information, blatantly false information. For example, Merck says its controversial HPV Gardasil vaccine in the manual, when I looked online, had no serious adverse events. So that's what doctors are learning. There's just no downside, which is, of course, not true of any medicine. They all have adverse events. But you need not go any further than look at the label that Merck wrote for its own vaccine. There are dozens of serious adverse events on there, everything from paralysis to death. And yet you compare that with what they're teaching doctors, and it just says there are no serious adverse events reported. How this is allowed to exist, I don't know. But I think this goes a long way to explaining how doctors are steered to treat you a certain way and not to ask questions about those pesky side effects and to look for them and to report them like they're supposed to do.
Yeah, those side effects can be pesky, and it can prevent people from taking their drugs and spending a lot of money on them. And I have to say, I mean, my doctor is actually great. He's one of the very few. My kids' doctors had to change pediatricians several times during the COVID pandemic because they don't know anything anymore. It's not like, it used to be in America that people really took to their craft. They wanted to be experts in their field. Today, all you get is, it's CDC guidance. It's CDC guidance. It comes from Health and Human Services. They don't explain much. Have you noticed a major change of the private practices closing and everyone going into these big medical groups? In my area, it's Stony Brook and Northwell Health. Other areas are seeing the same exact thing. Have we lost something in America because of that?
Well, definitely. And I think this is by design. The same forces that want to control how doctors treat you want to control the whole system. What will be insured and what won't? Because if the insurance doesn't cover a treatment, you won't get it. So they're not going to cover the treatments that don't make a lot of money or that they don't want you to know about. It's a whole system designed, I think, against good public health. The good news is there is a whole coalition of new doctors and independent thinkers that were born of the COVID crisis. A lot of them went along, but a lot of them didn't. And they were in the mainstream and they were publishing peer-reviewed science, and they found themselves on the outs with their own employers over basically practicing good medicine. And I think this is the mistake that the propagandists made, being so audacious during COVID with the misinformation and the smearing of people who were off the narrative. It created activists out of people who really weren't activists and didn't see themselves that way, who are forming new coalitions and trying to do independent research to answer these questions that it doesn't seem like the government and Big Pharma want answered about root causes behind our health problems.
Well, and that's a good point. One of the things I have to ask, what you research, is the insurance companies, because it seems that it would be in their interest to get people healthy. I mean, let's face it, things like cholesterol, obesity, high blood pressure, a lot of that can be changed through certain dietary practices. You just look at the nutrition and exercise. Doesn't require you to take a pill every single day. Why haven't the insurance companies pushed back more? Has the medical establishment infiltrated these insurance companies? What you research?
Absolutely. It's the same group that's influencing the whole system. Insurance companies make more money. Remember, they're charging you, but the reimbursements that they're paid for treating you for these illnesses and overpaying for medicine is bigger than if you don't get treatment at all. So they're making money off of this, and their strings are pulled by some of the same people who are setting up the rest of the system to make sure that money is made a certain way, that you're treated a certain way, that certain medications are covered, certain treatments are not covered. And I think that's all part of the equation.
Now, we need to take a quick break, but when we get back from this break, I want to talk to you about the importance of trust within the medical community and the establishment. So everyone hang tight. We'll be right back. Are you prepared for the unexpected? As a former emergency manager, being prepared is not a choice, it's a necessity, and that's where the Wellness Company comes in. Imagine having the peace of mind that you're equipped to handle any medical crisis, from tick bites to the latest pandemic. The Wellness Company's medical emergency kit is your lifeline, packed with essential medications like ivermectin, emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and more. This kit is your ultimate preparedness solution. The Wellness Company's team of renowned medical professionals, including Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and more. They are truth-seeking doctors, and they have designed a kit that sets the gold standard for safety and prevention. Don't wait for the next crisis to strike. Visit twc.health/PAS and use promo code PAS for an exclusive 10% discount just for being a listener of this show. Prepare today, rest easy tomorrow. Use code PAS at checkout. Welcome back, everyone. So, Sharyl, and Follow the Science, you talk about trust within the medical establishment, and we've seen trust collapse, and rightly so. I understand why it's collapsed. People just don't trust the healthcare system anymore. And this is the one area that actually had pretty high levels of trust. People did respect it. How dangerous is it when people can't even trust the institutions that are supposed to be protecting them?
Well, we're at a really precarious time because of that. And it's their fault. They're fond, meaning federal agencies and the overseers are fond of saying, oh, it's these skeptics or the anti-vaxxers who are causing this loss of confidence. And I argue it's your fault. The loss of confidence comes from people not believing that you're looking out for their best health, not believing that if there is a dangerous medicine, you're going to alert them to it, or even just caution them about the normal side effects of medicine. You've created that dynamic. I argue that being more forthcoming about what we know about medicine and vaccines would actually preserve confidence in the program and make people safer. But in fact, they've chosen this other route. So I think it's a really bad time when I guess maybe half the people do look at this advice that they get from the federal government and trust it, and half of them don't. Even when the government might put out good guidance, you don't know what to believe. I think that's a really bad time. And it puts a lot of onus on us, unfortunately, to do our own research and critical thinking. It's not easy because the information landscape is so managed, but I do have some tips on how to do that, become a critical thinker and consult and find good sources of information on your health versus what's being pushed at you every day.
And can you tell the audience, give them some tips of what they should be looking for? I mean, in this day and age, obviously it's information overload. It's very difficult to find information that you can reliably trust. So can you give the audience some pointers that you lay out and follow the science?
Well, yes. Sadly, when you hear everybody on the same narrative, meaning the media and government, in fact, using the same verbiage to push out a narrative, your first thought should be that the opposite may be true. And unfortunately, you won't be able to unearth the good peer-reviewed published studies that report the opposite because they will be filtered out from your Google search. I've experienced that firsthand. If I don't know the name of the study specifically and a lot of details and search for it on Google Scholar, I can't find it. I've tried. So it's hard, but I think there are some resources we can point to, which I do in the book. I list some specifics, but from a critical thinking standpoint, you need not look further than those who are correct. This is what I do as a journalist. We didn't know who was going to be right on the front end of COVID necessarily. We now have a track record and we can see a body of scientists that have formed organizations, and they speak out now, who are correct about all of these matters. Those are the people who I argue you should give greater weight to when they weigh in on public health matters in the future. Obviously, they have a better track record for the past, not the same people who are wrong about so many things. So there's a pretty strong and building list of those types of people and resources. And so that's number one. Plus put that together with your critical thinking skills, that when everyone's on the same page, today it may mean that the opposite of what they're saying could be the case.
No, unfortunately, they don't teach critical thinking in schools anymore. When it's that firsthand.
Yeah.
And it makes it difficult because it seems like we're living in a day and age where people want to be told what to do, what to think. They want the government to step in and direct them on how to do these things. Now, by your very nature and your career from the beginning, you're someone that's always skeptical of government policies because you've witnessed the abuses with your investigatory skills. When it comes to the idea of the vaccines and the vaccine promoters and the financial ties that exist there, you lay it out well in Follow the Science. Can you just give the audience a brief overview of what how much money is really at stake in all this?
I don't remember the total, but hundreds of billions of dollars are made, particularly if you can get a vaccine that schools will mandate. That's an instant blockbuster for the rest of the pharmaceutical industry's life. And they know that they need just a few of these to help get them by for all the medicines that they may not create or all the problems that they have with their others. But I would like to say, I was not as skeptical as I should have been about medicine 20 years ago before I started being assigned to cover these stories. I thought peer-reviewed published studies were the gold standard. Your doctor would never lie. Public health agencies would not lie, and they're out for your best interests. I was shocked as anybody when I learned what I learned about vaccines. My daughter's fully vaccinated. I didn't know anything about these warnings that I should have been given when she was vaccinated, such as when she got the polio vaccine, I was told, would you like her to have sugar water or another shot? There was a choice. And of course, as a mom, I said sugar water. What they didn't tell me, they left out, and I learned many years later, the sugar water, the oral polio vaccine, carries a slight risk of giving the kid polio. The injectable does not. I would never have chosen to give her oral when the injectable was available if someone had told me the facts behind it. And I learned this from an officer in the vaccine injury court years later. It was just stunning. I looked it up. I hardly believed it. Now the oral polio vaccine's finally been pulled off the market in this country, still being used around the world. The last cases of polio we had in this country were all from the vaccine. These are things they don't tell you. So I started out not as a skeptic on things I should have been. And I've learned so much. And I think the book, I'm trying to take people with specific examples, certain ones I've chosen to help bring them along on a journey from where they may be, which is maybe a little more trusting, to the place where I've come to be over 20 years through the facts and the investigations that I've done.
I'll tell you, it's scary when we look at government, and I want to switch gears and get into politics. So everyone, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. So now let's switch gears. Let's talk a little politics. You mentioned that there were some scientists that were pushing back, that were forcefully speaking out. We saw the Great Barrington Declaration with Dr. Bhattacharya, Dr. Gupta, Dr. Koldroff, and they were heavily silenced and censored. They were attacked. They were marginalized. When you look at our government, how out of control has it gotten when it comes to censorship, controlling thoughts, targeting journalists like yourself? How dangerous has it become out there?
This is one of the biggest stories of our time. And the fact that journalists have been convinced to get on board with the censorship and argue that this is a good thing and a necessary thing in some cases, to argue that some government entity or journalistic entity should be the arbiters of what's true when they can't possibly know in many instances, or they're pushing out false information themselves. This is a global effort that's going on. It's happening. I just got back from Europe. I'll be reporting on that for my TV program, Full Measure. There are censorship controls, South America, all over the globe, where the popular sentiment is they're trying to squelch that and make you think that you're an outlier when you're not on these matters, because they want to be able to control your thought and your opinion. And I'm just stunned that we've kind of slowly gone down this slippery slope where there's even a discussion about censorship being a good and necessary thing. I mean, that's not even on the table in my book, but there's fine point debates now about what should and shouldn't be censored. And there was something circulating, a bit of a Kamala Harris interview where she was cheering on and basically saying Elon Musk should be, and Twitter should be pulled off the internet because it needed to be censored because it can influence so many people. And I'm thinking, what world are we living in that people don't understand the basic tenets of our Constitution was not to allow government to do these sorts of things to the people? And we're entertaining these discussions now. It's a very dangerous time.
Well, more terrifying than that, not a single one of my students could pass a citizenship exam this year. Every semester, the first day, I give all my students a citizenship exam, including questions from the Constitution, and they could not pass it, not a single one. So it shows you that they're not even being taught the Constitution. And that's why the politicians in charge have little regard for these freedoms. And when you said that you're traveling in Europe, we're not talking about authoritarian countries like communist China. We're talking about liberal democracies throughout the world that are now clamping down on the freedom of speech. You brought up Kamala Harris. She released a clip in October of 2019 where she was calling for the president at the time to be deplatformed. How much power do these people have that they could exert on someone like Elon Musk? Are you worried that ultimately they will try and shut X down?
Absolutely. They're looking for ways now. I have no doubt there are task forces and all kinds of powers, not just in the United States, trying to figure out how to shut down Elon Musk with the farce that he's supposedly running a social media platform that suddenly, when he took over, became purveyors of misinformation. There was more misinformation, arguably, before he took over Twitter, number one. Number two, I don't think it should be up to these, the people who run the big tech platforms to have to cull through and divine what misinformation is. I think it's their prerogative to give you the tools to do this yourself, to see what you want. But anytime you start saying these third parties that all have vested interests should be deciding who can say what based on maybe less knowledge than the person saying it has. I've had pieces of mine pulled off the web, or at least warned about, when everything in it was indisputably factually correct by people, these fake fact checkers like Health Feedback, who work for these conflicted interests, who don't know nearly as much about the story I investigated as I know. And yet they step in and say, well, we're going to just call that misinformation. And it's not, let's be clear, Nick, it's not because they really want you and I not to see misinformation. They don't want us to see true information. Their goal isn't really to take off the bad stuff. Their goal is to take off the good stuff that might convince you not to believe the stuff that they want you to believe. And when you start looking at it that way and see how insidious it is, they're not altruistically just trying to help make everything better. They're actually serving their own, political and special interest goals.
It comes down to power. I mean, I constantly say, first of all, the largest purveyors of misinformation and disinformation throughout history, as a political scientist and historian, have been governments. I mean, that's been true throughout history. And now it goes beyond the idea. We talk a lot about censorship because it's easy to explain and we actually see it in real time. But do you think it goes deeper than that? Do you think it's not necessarily about silencing people, but it's about controlling how people think? And does this tie into the whole big pharma, big corporations, big tech, government, and media all merging into one?
Well, how people think and how they come to behave and self-censor. There are many people now who know if they write certain things on their popular TikTok account, it's going to get flagged. Or if they post something on YouTube that YouTube doesn't like because YouTube's financial interests don't like it, that they may risk not being able to have their YouTube account. So they self-censor. Someone told me the other day he circulated a tweet or recirculated a tweet, not on Twitter, so on one of these platforms that's more censored, showing me in a clip testifying to Congress. And he said that was flagged by community notes that it wasn't a real clip. And he had to take it down or lose his account. It was a real clip. But you have no argument, against those who declare themselves to be the censors and the arbiters of information. And pretty soon you come to learn they don't want the vaccine word. They don't want this word. They don't want that word. And that shapes the whole information landscape. Cutting off other people who think the same way or have questions, they're fooled into thinking, well, I'm the only one asking it, or I dare not speak of it, when in fact they may actually be the majority view. But this whole propaganda campaign is intended to make sure you don't think that or don't communicate that.
And I constantly remind my audience of the National Strategy for Countering Domestic Terrorism that was released in June of 2021 by the Biden administration, where it talks about this idea of misinformation, disinformation. It says people expressing anti-government or anti-authority sentiment could be labeled as potential domestic violent extremists. And the examples they use are narratives that go against the coronavirus pandemic and what the government's put out there. So you could bash America all day long, but the second you criticize government or government policies, well, now you're talking anti-government, anti-authority. And one of the pillars, pillar one, talks about creating partnerships, private-public partnerships with the government, so that the private entities could serve as the eyes and ears of the government. The reason I bring that up is you have organizations like NewsGuard that's being contracted by governments, not just the federal government, state governments, local governments, schools, to disseminate what's misinformation and disinformation when it comes to media. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, virtually all, not all, but virtually all of what I call the fake fact checkers, the media literacy groups, the journalistic endeavors, the places where reporters are supposed to go for resources and truth, are funded and shaped by these conflicted interests, sometimes with the government in the backdrop, sometimes with the billionaire activists who fund these things in the backdrop. But these groups are held out as if they're independent nonprofits of some kind. And that confuses everybody. I understand why. I talk about this a lot in the book and in previous books. The roles that nonprofits and LLCs and websites and third parties that don't always disclose their interest, even if you look hard for it on the website, the role that they play in misleading us and declaring themselves arbiters of truth. And then we in the media are such sheep. We're not asking the basic questions. We go, oh, here's a reporter's resource. Let's go there for our information. There's the truth. Instead of thinking to themselves, I wonder who started this website. I wonder if their information is accurate or if there's conflicts of interest. They simply just parrot what's put out there. That's, I think, the most surprising thing to me as a journalist, how we have marched in lockstep without the critical thinking skills and without the independent thought down this road of talking about the misinformation and disinformation. This was never discussed in a newsroom before about 2016. These words that you're using, this has all been created and manufactured, I say, in the era of Donald Trump, because they found him uniquely dangerous because he was not beholden to the same financial interests as traditional Democrats and Republicans. This whole, complex grew up out of that. And until that moment, really, we never had these discussions in newsrooms. We reported the news by and large. There was not talk of censoring entire lines of thought.
And that's a great point. And that leads me, you just had Dana Bash interviewing the presidential candidate, Democrat nominee Kamala Harris, and you've been a journalist for a long time. When you sit down with someone that wants to be president of the United States, would you give them multiple choice options as you're asking the question?
I thought that was so odd. I felt like she was awkward. I felt like she was trying to make Kamala Harris comfortable. Kamala Harris looked to me like she was about to cry. And it looked as if Dana Bash was trying to help her along and make her feel comfortable and not cry or not be scared. I mean, it was just a little bit bizarre. But even given the multiple choice answers, she didn't answer the questions, up to the level that I think everybody expected. And, there's certain questions you can ask, and I try to do this. You don't have to be mean, but you can certainly ask questions that get at the heart of letting them explain a controversy. And one thing I would ask of Kamala Harris when she says, I no longer want to ban fracking. Well, then the next question would be, are you in support of fracking? You say you won't ban it. Would you take steps to restrict it? What would be your policy on this? Do you see an attempt to phase it out? There's a lot of things short of a ban. Look at the language that the politician is using. There are other questions to be asked to tease out what's really their position. And instead, the one chance we had, which is bizarre in of itself, we really didn't get any answers.
Well, and there was no follow-up. So I would love to see Kamala Harris on Full Measure and then interview with you.
We have asked, by the way, we will have Donald Trump. We've asked, just as we asked for Joe Biden for several years, and he never said yes. And so far, the Harris team has not said yes.
Well, it's because the establishment legacy media serves as protectorates of Democratic candidates. I mean, that's clear. And to your point with banning fracking, that could have been the easiest question to answer. Hey, listen, prior to being vice president, I disagreed with fracking. As vice president, I learned and grew on the job. I mean, it's a very simple thing, but she can't even answer that. And it really shows you. So last question. The state of journalism seems to be more of activism as opposed to journalism. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And we've talked about this in the past. The whole industry has been reshaped into a new invention that's not at all what you and I used to think of as journalism. It is bias and activism and fake fact checking and making sure you don't see certain information. Growing out of that are new models. I don't think we're exactly where we're going to be in the end, and I don't think we're going back to what we had. Not that it was perfect, but maybe in many respects it was better. We're not going back there. But I think we're building something in the future. We don't know exactly what it will look like. And Substack is an example where there are independent journalists, traditionally from the left or the right, who have freer forum to speak without being canceled on Substack, for example. There are wealthy people who want independent and good information out there who are trying to figure out how to create new platforms people can use where their payment platforms aren't canceled, when they're off the narrative, where they're not canceled. There are people like Larry Sanger, who co-founded Wikipedia, who's looking at trying to create a new idea like that. There are some wealthy funders who want to fund something like that if the idea can be invented. So I think we'll come up with something better. And I think we're developing something better than what we have today. But right now, a lot of people are still stuck in the legacy media, but with the mindset that it's somehow accurate and fair when it's not. And then there's a group of people moving off of that, trying to figure out how to get the word out. We're just sort of in this transition phase.
Well, I know I said that was the last question, but one more. I lied to you. Do you think, so I'm starting to see this alliance, people that identify as liberals, people that identify as conservatives, really joining together to talk about free speech, to talk about government abuses, that the government has grown too powerful, that, hey, maybe we need to introduce more checks. Do you think that may be a path forward where you see these liberals and conservatives joining together on the core existential issues, similar to what Robert F. Kennedy talked about and why he's supporting Trump? Do you think that is something that could really make a profound change going forward?
It is. I wrote about this in my recent Substack. I said there's a new party that's actually formed under our noses. It just doesn't have a name. What shall we call it? And it's exactly what you say. It's people who may differ on some core issues still, like abortion and whether there's climate change that man can control. but they agree on key issues that have eclipsed those issues for the moment, like censorship and free press and the things that we talk about. There's an epic battle, something else I'm reporting on Full Measure coming up actually very soon in my new season 10 of Full Measure. There's an epic battle around the globe and here in the US to not let that happen. They understand, meaning the establishment parties, whether left or right, they understand there's a popular coalition of people who are sick of the establishment and feel like they're not getting the truth and don't want their lives controlled in the way that they're trying. And right now, the establishment is fighting for its life. It's trying to jail these people. It's trying to outlaw their free speech. That's why we're seeing these clashes, I think, around the world and these clashes of minds here in the United States. I hope and I think and I believe the people will ultimately survive and win out in this battle. But it's a very, precarious time.
Well, you're going against Goliath. That's, it's not easy. Everyone needs to check out Follow the Science, How Big Pharma Misleads, Obscures, and Prevails. We're going to have links up at the PAS report to your Substack, Twitter, or X, whatever it's called these days, and your other books as well. Sharyl, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at pasreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.